one of the functions of aldosterone is to increase the secretion of potassium and as well as of hydrogen ions. When there is a decreased secretion of aldosterone, it leads to retention of less secretion of potassium in the renal tubules, leading to retention of potassium ions in the body and hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia leads to cardiac toxicity, which might lead to death. On the other hand, when there is increased secretion of aldosterone, it leads to excessive secretion of potassium ions in the renal tubules, leading to hypokalemia. Hypokalemia causes muscle weakness. Hypokalemia causes muscle weakness. Here in this picture, Subitamish is posted. The left hand side is the renal tubular lumen, on the right hand side is the body fluids. The basolateral membrane on the right side, you have the sodium potassium ATPase pump. Aldosterone increases the activity of sodium potassium ATPase pump so that potassium ions are pumped into the renal tubular cells. And this potassium ion then diffuses out of the cell and is secreted into the tubular lumen through the potassium channels in the apical. Increased activity of aldosterone leads to increased secretion of potassium ions and aldosterone also has effects on hydrogen ion concentration in the body. Normal quantities of aldosterone keeps on secreting hydrogen ions into the renal tubular fluid, thus eliminating excess hydrogen ions from the body, which helps in maintenance of the body's acid-base balance. Now, while increasing the sodium reabsorption from renal tubules, aldosterone also at the same time causes tubular secretion of hydrogen ions. To some extent, secretion of hydrogen ions occurs in exchange of sodium. And this reduces the hydrogen ion load in the body. This picture is from Gaitun, not a very clear one. On the right hand side is the tubular lumen, on the left hand side is the interstitial with the kidneys. And you can see in the right hand side, in the luminal membrane of the cell, there is a sodium hydrogen exchanger. Sodium hydrogen exchanger. So when there is increased activity of aldosterone, there is increased reabsorption of sodium ions from the renal tubular cells to the basolateral membrane, and this creates sodium concentration gradient from the tubular lumen into the cell. This allows diffusion of sodium ions from the lumen into the cell. And this diffusion, at the same time, like somewhat like sodium glucose co-transport or sodium amino acid co-transport, this facilitates the secretion of hydrogen ions in the opposite direction, that is from the cell into the lumen. This is what aldosterone does to sodium hydrogen exchanger. It increases reabsorption of sodium.
কি হয় সিট ভাড়া কেমন সিট ভাড়া দিলে কি দিতে হয় দরজা সবই তো দিতে হয় খাটটাট খালি থাকার জন্য হান্ডি পান্ডি দিতে হয় না
That's so aldosterone increases sodium reabsorption through the luminal membrane and in turn increases the secretion of hydrogen ions in exchange of sodium. This occurs with the help of sodium hydrogen exchanger. Okay. Now, in normal conditions, the amount of hydrogen ion that is secreted into the renal tubules by aldosterone is essential for maintenance of acid-base balance. But when there is hypersecretion of aldosterone, it causes excessive secretion of hydrogen ions, resulting in alkalosis. On the other hand, when there is hyposecretion of aldosterone ion, it fails to secrete adequate quantities of hydrogen. Sorry, when there is hyposecretion of aldosterone, it fails to secrete adequate quantities of hydrogen into the renal tubules, which leads to retention of the ions and ultimately leads to acidosis. So hypersecretion of aldosterone leads to alkalosis. Hypersecretion of aldosterone leads to acidosis because of impairment in secretion of hydrogen ions. On the sweat and salivary glands and also on the intestines, aldosterone has a similar effect that it increases reabsorption of sodium ions through the tubular epithelial cells of the sweat gland ducts, of the salivary gland ducts, as well as the lining epithelium of the intestines. So, sodium ion is retained, or in other words, prevention of loss of sodium ions by aldosterone is also carried out to the sweat glands and salivary glands and the intestines. In decreased aldosterone secretion, sodium retention is also decreased and sodium is lost. There is increased loss of sodium through sweat, increased loss of sodium through saliva, through intestines. And hyposecretion of aldosterone might even lead to diarrhea. Hyposecretion of sodium might even lead to diarrhea because of loss of sodium reabsorption, decreased sodium reabsorption by the intestinal epithelium. Sodium we know is an osmotically active particle. When sodium reabsorption is decreased, it remains in the intestinal lumen and it might lead to, it might hold on to water, thus result in diarrhea. A mode of action of sodium ions, I have already discussed it in context of the absorption of sodium, Mode of action of aldosterone is via activating messenger RNA, via increasing the transcription of messenger RNA from DNA. The sequence of events is this. Aldosterone is a steroid hormone. Being steroid, it can directly dissolve through the phospholipid bilayer of the target cell and enter the cytoplasm, where it binds with mineralocorticoid receptor, forming a hormone receptor complex. The hormone receptor complex then enters the nucleus. In the nucleus, it binds with specific sites on DNA and activates certain gene response elements. This results in activation of genes, that is, transcription of the definite genes, genetic codes from DNA to mRNA, messenger RNA. So messenger RNA containing the codes of certain proteins are formed, and the messenger RNA then move out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm, where they enter into the endoplasmic reticulum attached ribosomes and initiate protein synthesis. That is, messenger RNA is then translated. Translation leads to formation of proteins. The proteins include sodium potassium ATPase pump, epithelial sodium channels, and also some mitochondrial enzymes. All of these lead to increased reabsorption of sodium. Epithelial sodium channel in the vessels in the luminal membrane increases diffusion of sodium from the tubular lumen into the principal cells, and sodium potassium pumps this reabsorbed sodium out of the cell into the tubular fluid. Potassium moves in the opposite direction and is secreted into the tubular lumen. Similarly, hydrogen ion is also secreted into the tubular lumen. Regulation of secretion of aldosterone. Aldosterone secretion is regulated by the following factors: increased potassium ion concentration, decreased sodium ion concentration, decreased cell volume, and ACTH. Out of this, ACTH, the adrenocortical hormone from the anterior pituitary, is the least effective. First two, increase potassium and decrease sodium ion concentration in the ECF, both of which stimulate aldosterone secretion. Decrease sodium ion in sodium concentration in the ECF volume stimulates aldosterone secretion by activating the renin-angiotensin mechanism. We know that when there is decreased sodium, it stimulates the renin-angiotensin aldosterone mechanism by the macula densa and juxtaglomerular cells. Juxtaglomerular cells increase secretion of renin, which in turn causes enzymatic cleavage of the globulin angiotensinogen. Angiotensinogen is synthesized by the liver. Angiotensinogen is broken down to angiotensin 1 by renin. Angiotensin 1 is then broken down to angiotensin 2 by the enzyme angiotensin converting enzyme that is secreted by pulmonary capillary endothelium. So, in this way, angiotensin 2 is increased. Angiotensin 2 acts on the glomerulus to secrete more, increase the synthesis and secretion of aldosterone. Aldosterone in turn increases sodium and water retention and excretion of potassium and hydrogen ions. This leads to retention of sodium, increase in sodium concentration, and increase the cell volume. Okay. Adrenocorticotropic hormone mainly stimulates the secretion of glucocorticoids. It has a small effect on aldosterone synthesis. This is how all these act. Angiotensin converting enzyme converts angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. Angiotensin 2 acts on the adrenal glands to increase synthesis of aldosterone, which in turn acts on the renal tubular cells, especially the principal cells of the renal tubules. These red bars, are the sites of prevention of the activity of the various pathways. Okay. Here you can see a more clear picture. Increased sodium, increased potassium or decreased sodium or decreased DCF leads to stimulation of the JJ apparatus, leading to increased renin angiotensin activity. Angiotensin 2 activates the adrenal cortex and increases aldosterone secretion, which in turn activates the kidney cells, tubular cells, principal cells of the renal tubules, increasing sodium retention, water retention, excretion of potassium, excretion of hydrogen ion, ultimately resulting in rectification of these conditions. So this is a negative feedback loop. So this is all about mineralocorticoid activity. Now let's move on to glucocorticoids. Glucocorticoids mainly act on carbohydrate metabolism. Mainly have effects on carbohydrate metabolism. This does not mean that they do not have metabolic activities of other nutrients or the concentration of electrolytes. Glucocorticoids being steroids, they also have a small amount of mineralocorticoid activity. But their main effect is on metabolism of carbohydrate and to a lesser extent, metabolism of fat and protein. The main glucocorticoid in the body is cortisol, to a lesser extent, corticosterol and cortisol. Most powerful is cortisol, the second most powerful is corticosterol. Cortisol has very minimal effects. They are secreted by the zona fasciculata, the middle layer, the widest layer of the adrenal cortex. The fasciculata, the parenchymal cells are arranged in cords, fascicles. Being glucocorticoids, they are synthesized from cholesterol. Cholesterol is first converted to pregnenolone, then 7-hydroxyprogesterone, then corticosterone, and finally cortisol. Sorry, not corticosterone, deoxycortisol, and then finally cortisol. So this is the on the right hand side you will see the elaborate picture of synthesis of cortisol from cholesterol. 21 alpha hydroxylase and 11 beta hydroxylase enzymes are required in the last two steps. Chemistry. Similar to aldosterone, cortisol glucocorticoids are also 21 carbon steroids, C21. Then others are C17 or C19, glucocorticoids are C21. Half-lives of 70 to 90 minutes, especially cortisol. And the daily output is 10 microgram. Plasma level is 13, around about 14 microgram per deciliter of plasma. Functions of glucocorticoids. Cortisol or hydrocortisone is another one. Probably this is a synthetic one. Cortisol is most potent and has 95% of all glucocorticoid activity in our body. Corticosterone is less potent, and cortisol the least. Corticosterone has only 4% of glucocorticoid activity. Total cortisone only 1%. So the most powerful one is cortisol. Aldosterone, I said before, is known as a life-saving hormone, but glucocorticoid, especially cortisol, is no less important. It helps to withstand various forms of stress, be it physical or mental or psychological. Cortisol helps us to withstand, endure physical stress, injuries, inflammations, infections, or other forms of trauma, as well as psychological or mental stress. Cortisol especially also have metabolic effects on carbohydrates, protein, and fat. These hormones show mild mineralocorticoid activity, and this removal of adrenal glands would be very harmful for the person because adrenalectomy, removal of adrenal gland, would lead to loss of circulating cholesterol. Sorry, cortisol, not cholesterol. And since cortisol or other glucocorticoids are important for enduring stress, loss of cortisol as a result of adrenalectomy would render the person unable to endure, unable to withstand stress. So even a small amount of stress might lead to the death of a person. The functions of glucocorticoids, especially cortisol, they are summarized here: carbohydrate metabolism, protein metabolism, fat metabolism, water and mineral, bone, muscles, erythropoiesis, vessels, CNS. Glucocorticoids are permissive action, resistant to stress, anti-inflammatory, and immunosuppressive actions. Cortisol increases the blood glucose level in two major ways. Number one, by promoting gluconeogenesis in the liver. And number two, by inhibiting uptake and utilization of glucose by the peripheral tissues. Gluconeogenesis, we know, is the formation of carbohydrates, glucose, from non-carbohydrate sources, mostly from amino acids. What cortisol or other glucocorticoids do is that they mobilize amino acids from peripheral tissues. They break down peripheral protein, they break down especially muscle protein, and amino acids are mobilized. The amino acids are then taken to the liver. Cortisol helps amino acid uptake by the liver cells, hepatocytes, where these amino acids are utilized to form glucose, that is gluconeogenesis, as well as new proteins in the liver cells. That means cortisol decreases peripheral protein, catabolizes peripheral protein, increases circulating amino acid levels, increases amino acid uptake by the hepatocytes, increases gluconeogenesis and protein synthesis by the liver. These are the effects of cortisol. You can say on protein metabolism as well as carbohydrate metabolism. Cortisol also decreases glucose uptake and utilization by the peripheral tissues. Okay. Hypersecretion of glucocorticoids increases the blood glucose level because cortisol decreases glucose uptake by the tissues. Hypersecretion of cortisol glucocorticoids will lead to increased blood glucose level, resulting in hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia will in turn lead to glycosuria and adrenal diabetes, the form of diabetes mellitus, resulting from increased activity of glucocorticoids and cortisol. Hyposecretion of cortisol or other glucocorticoids would lead to hypoglycemia, and if a person fasts in adrenal insufficiency or glucocorticoid secretion is decreased, it might lead to it might be fatal. Fasting during adrenal insufficiency might be fatal. It might lead to death. Protein metabolism, I've said already, glucocorticoids promote catabolism of protein in the peripheral tissues, decreases cellular protein plasma amino acids levels are increased. And these amino acids are utilized by the hepatocytes to increase protein synthesis, especially plasma proteins, which are helpful for countering stress and also gluconeogenesis. Cortisol causes catabolism of proteins by following methods. We have already discussed this. Because of breakdown of peripheral proteins, muscle gain excessive cortisol. Fat metabolism. Cortisol spares glucose. Cortisol decreases the utilization of glucose and increases the utilization of fat. Increases the utilization of fat for energy. This is somewhat similar to the effect of growth hormone. Cortisol decreases the utilization of glucose, carbohydrates for energy, and increases the utilization of fat for energy. This effect is somewhat similar to that of growth hormone. Cortisol mobilizes fat and redistributes it throughout the body, especially it causes deposition of fat in the frontal tissues of the face, of the shoulders, and back of the neck. And cortisol mobilizes fats and make fatty acids available for utilization. This increased utilization of fat by cortisol leads to formation of ketone bodies. That lead to formation of ketone bodies. It is called the ketogenic effect. Hypersecretion of cortisol causes an increased deposition of fat in the trunks, leading to obesity. It is called truncal obesity. Besides the trunk, especially on the face, on the shoulders, back of the neck, chest, some fat is also deposited in the abdomen, and also some in the hip region. We know cortisol is a steroid. Glucocorticoids are all steroids, and being steroids, they have some mineralocorticoid activity. They have some sodium retention activity. Retention of sodium leads to reduction of water. So indirectly, they have some effect on water body fluid balance in the body. Cortisol increases, as I said, sodium retention because of the mineralocorticoid activity. This also leads to some increase in excretion of potassium. Therefore, hypersecretion of glucocorticoids will lead to hypertension and edema, hypokalemia. Hypokalemia will lead to muscle weakness. On the muscles, cortisol has the very profound effect of muscle wasting due to protein catabolism. Uh, and this leads to muscle weakness. Cortisol decreases the number of circulating eosinophils. In this way, it has some anti-allergic activity. It also decreases the activity, the number and the activity of basophils and mast cells, and also lymphocytes. But cortisol increases the circulating levels of neutrophils and red cells and platelets, which are cells that counter stress in the acute stage. They help to endure stress. Cortisol has some muscular effects. They're essential for the constrictor activity of the catecholamines, adrenaline, and noradrenaline, which are secreted by the adrenal medulla. Adrenal insufficiency will lead to the blood vessels failing to respond to adrenaline. Adrenaline is given when a person is in shock. In such cases, uh, cortisol helps adrenaline to cortisol helps blood vessels to respond to adrenaline. But if there is deficiency of cortisol, adrenaline would fail to cause vasoconstriction, which might lead to which delay in countering shock. Permissive action of glucocorticoids. This is a very important point. Permissive action of glucocorticoids refers to execution of action of some hormones only in the presence of glucocorticoids. The calorigenic effect of glucagon, the lipolytic effect of catecholamines, the vasoconstrictor effect of the catecholamines, the dilator effect of catecholamines. All of these depend on the presence and activity of glucocorticoids, especially cortisol. Without cortisol, these effects of catecholamines and glucagon would be not carried out. Exposure to any type of stress, whether it's physical, whether it's injury, whether it's inflammation, infection, or whether it's psychological or mental stress, it leads to increased secretion of adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary, which in turn stimulates the adrenal cortex, especially the fasciculator, and helps increase synthesis and secretion of glucocorticoids, especially cortisol. Increasing glucocorticoid level is essential for enduring stress because glucocorticoids offer high resistance to the body. This it does in the following way. It causes immediate release and transport of amino acids from the peripheral tissues to the liver cells for synthesis of new proteins, especially in the form of plasma proteins. These proteins are then transported by the bloodstream to the circulation to wherever there occurs injury, wherever there is an inflammation, wherever in the body microorganisms have invaded and infected the tissues. So the new proteins synthesized by the liver are carried to those sites that help in isolating the infection, isolating the inflammation, or help repair the injury. So in this way, cortisol helps in relief of stress. Release of fatty acids from the cells also helps to produce energy, which is required during the healing process of the stress. Enhancement of vascular response to catecholamines and fatty acid mobilizing activity of catecholamines are also necessary to withstand stress, and these are allowed by cortisol by their permissive effect. Prevention of severity of other changes in the body that are caused by stress is also done by cortisol. Cortisol prevents those changes. Anti-inflammatory effects, I've already mentioned it here. Resistance to stress. Inflammation is a form of stress. Inflammation is defined as a localized protective response induced by injury or destruction of tissues. When a tissue is injured, mechanical or chemical factors, some substances are released in the affected area. These substances produce either excessive inflammation. Here you can see an injury there is an injury, mast cells and other resident macrophages just release cytokines. They act upon the vessels. They recruit the permeability of the vessels. They recruit the diseases, which impair the injury, in site of injury. There are pathogens at the site of injury. The WBCs then engulf phagocytosis, injured or pathogens. Increased delivery of the WBCs to the site of injury is carried out by vasodilation. Vasodilation is done by vasodilation is carried out by the permissive effect of not the permissive, the inflammatory effect of anti-stress effect of glucocorticoids. So these are the effects. Glucocorticoids prevent inflammatory reactions. Even if inflammation has already started, because for the early resolution of inflammation, glucocorticoids prevent inflammation by changes inhibiting the release of chemical substances and thus stabilizing the membrane of lysosome and preventing vasodilation. So these are very tall anti-allergenic actions. Corticosteroid prevent reaction in allergic conditions in case of inflammation by inhibiting mast cell activity, by inhibiting basophil activity, by decreasing the circulating levels of eosinophil and their activity. Immunosuppressive effect is somewhat similar to anti-inflammatory effect. Cortisol suppresses the activity of lymphocytes, especially T lymphocytes. Lymphocytes take part in cellular immunity by decreasing the number of circulating T lymphocytes. Cortisol decreases the cell-mediated immunity. Cortisol, because it is a steroid, it also acts by binding with receptors in the cytoplasm and activating or initiating transcription of DNA to RNA, which in turn causes synthesis of various different types of enzymes that catalyze the different cellular reactions and which help carry out the effects of cortisol. Regulation of cortisol secretion. Anterior pituitary in the form of ACTH helps regulate cortisol secretion. Whenever there is stress, it stimulates the pituitary to secrete ACTH. ACTH in turn activates the zona fasciculators to synthesize and secrete cortisol. Any form of stress, whether it is trauma, infection, intense or extremes of temperature, injection of norepinephrine and other sympathogenic drugs, surgery. Surgery is a form of stress, physical stress injury. Injection of necrotizing substances, any debilitating diseases. All of these are stressful conditions and lead to increased secretion of ACTH and secondarily increased secretion of cortisol. So we don't have much time, only 3 minutes left. I have not discussed we don't have time for discussion for the various pathological conditions resulting from excesses or deficiencies of the various adrenocortical hormones such as Cushing syndrome, hyperaldosteronism, Addison's disease, etc. So probably if we will discuss this in the next class, probably on Sunday. If not on Sunday, then Thursday next. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope it was of some benefit. I labored a lot. I don't know how much you got on. So bye for today.